There's a quiet wisdom in the timing of life, a soft, almost imperceptible rhythm that Carl Jung often pointed to in his work on individuation and the unfolding of the self. What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size, he once said. And so it is with the treasures that arrive late, the healing that comes after a long winter, the love discovered after heartbreak, the insight that dawns when we've stopped trying to control it. These are not accidents of fate, but the deep workings of the unconscious, preparing us for what we could not yet hold. When life delays a blessing, it is often not a denial, but a gestation, a space for soul to grow large enough to receive it. Jung taught that the self has its own timing, distinct from the ego's impatience, and that true transformation cannot be forced. Just as a fruit ripens not by pressure, but by season, so too do the most meaningful parts of our journey mature quietly, often in the shadows, and when they emerge, whether a new calling, a reconciliation, or a long-awaited peace, they do so with a depth that could never have arrived earlier. In this, we begin to trust that what comes late may be not the least, but the most important gift of all. Dear everyone, before we continue the program, if you enjoy this topic, please comment number 1. If you'd like me to create more similar content, comment number 2. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any useful videos. Thank you, and wish you all meaningful moments. Have you ever felt like life forgot about you? That you missed your chance, your window closed, your moment passed? Maybe you look around and see others hitting milestones, marriage, success, clarity, while you're still trying to make sense of where you belong. You ask quietly, why is it taking so long for me? You wonder if you're falling behind, if something is wrong with you, if maybe your story just isn't meant to work out. In the silence between these thoughts, there's a deeper voice waiting. Carl Jung would call it the voice of the self, your true nature, the center of your being that does not rush. He believed life unfolds not according to the timelines of society or ego, but by the rhythms of the unconscious. And when something doesn't arrive when we want it, it's often because we are not yet ready to carry the weight of it. Jung wrote, "The afternoon of life must have a significance of its own, and cannot be merely a pitiful appendage to life's morning." He saw that many of life's most important gifts, healing, purpose, real love, deep transformation, arrive not at the beginning, but after struggle, delay, and surrender. They are not given quickly. They are earned by staying on the path, even when it feels like you're walking through fog. What comes late often comes deeper, because you are no longer asking for it from a place of need, but from a place of truth. And when it arrives, it is not what you wanted when you were desperate, but exactly what your soul had been calling in. This is a video for those who are still waiting, for those in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or beyond, wondering if they missed their time, or for anyone younger, already sensing that the best things in life don't always come on schedule. Join us as we explore Carl Jung's profound insight into the slow magic of transformation, the divine timing of the psyche, and why, sometimes, what comes late holds the greatest value of all. 1. The illusion of the clock. Why we feel behind. In the early hours of adulthood, most of us inherit a quiet pressure, a timeline not of our own choosing, but one handed to us by family, culture, school systems, and social comparison. It whispers to us in subtle expectations. Graduate by this age, fall in love by that age, succeed before 30, be settled by 40. We are conditioned to measure our worth against the ticking of this invisible clock. And yet, so many of us find ourselves falling out of sync with it. You wake up one day and realize your story doesn't match the template. Maybe your career hasn't taken shape. Maybe the relationship you thought would last dissolved. Maybe your passion turned out to be someone else's dream. And in that dissonance, you begin to feel like something's wrong, not just with your life, but with you. Carl Jung called this the tyranny of the ego, the part of us that craves control, image, and approval. The ego thrives on certainty, on comparison, and most of all, on time-bound identity. It wants to be someone, and it wants to be that someone now. But Jung warned us, thoroughly unprepared, we take the step into the afternoon of life. Worse still, we take this step with the false presupposition that our truths and ideals will serve us as hitherto. In other words, the goals that guided us in our 20s may begin to betray us later on. This feeling of falling behind is not a failure of character, it is a moment of awakening. The psyche begins to whisper, there is something more for you. But it will not arrive on the world's timeline. It will arrive on soul time. And soul time does not move in straight lines. It meanders, it waits, it delays, it demands transformation. This is why so many people experience what Jung called midlife crisis, though he viewed it not as a breakdown, but as an invitation. It's the ego being deconstructed so the self can emerge. The self is that deeper center within us that doesn't chase timelines, but seeks wholeness. And often it doesn't fully awaken until something in the outer world doesn't go according to plan. What appears to be delay is often design. You are being redirected, not punished. Think of it like this. A flower doesn't bloom before it's rooted. A tree doesn't bear fruit in the winter. But we demand that our lives perform before they're fully formed. We chase success before we understand what success really means to us. We pursue love before we have found any compassion for ourselves. We try to arrive before we've truly begun. The truth is, some things cannot come early. They cannot be rushed. They must incubate in the unconscious until the right season arrives. Jung likened the process of inner growth to alchemy, the ancient symbolic journey of turning base metals into gold. He saw this as a metaphor for the psychological journey. In the early stages, we are ruled by what the alchemists called the negredo, a darkening, a confusion, a chaos. We lose our old identities, our ambitions unravel, and we feel lost. But this is necessary. It's the breakdown that precedes the breakthrough. The world may see you as behind, but in truth, you may be right on schedule for your own transformation. Let us pause here and ask a deeper question. Who are you without the pressure to arrive on time? What would shift in your spirit if you trusted that your path is not late but layered, that you are not broken but becoming, that your pace is not slower but sacred? Carl Jung believed that the second half of life often reveals the truer self. He said, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. When we attempt to do so, we find ourselves anxious, restless, even depressed, not because we are failing, but because we are being called to evolve. What worked in the morning of our lives, ambition, structure, external validation, no longer nourishes the soul. A deeper calling begins to emerge, not to impress, but to integrate. Not to perform, but to become whole." So when life appears to be delaying you, maybe it's doing something better, preparing you. It may be removing what no longer serves you, hollowing out the spaces where ego once ruled, and making room for something more enduring to take root. Something like meaning, or purpose, or real love. And here's the paradox. What you longed for when you were younger might still arrive, but it will arrive in a different form. A form that fits your deeper self, not your public image. A form that doesn't just look right, but feels right. You won't need to chase it, you'll be ready to receive it. In this light, lateness is not failure. It is depth, it is mystery, it is alignment. You are not behind, you are becoming. 2. The soul schedule, individuation and the slow path to wholeness. Why do some people feel empty even when everything on the outside looks successful? Why do others come alive later in life, glowing with authenticity after years of struggle and confusion? To understand this, we must look at one of Carl Jung's most powerful contributions to psychology, the process of individuation. This is the path of becoming who you truly are, not who the world told you to be, not who your parents hoped you'd become, but the whole unique expression of your own psyche. And unlike the ego's plan, individuation does not happen quickly. It unfolds slowly, often painfully, and almost always off the beaten path. Jung wrote, "Individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and imperishable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. We could therefore translate individuation as coming to selfhood or self-realization. This is not about ego inflation or self-importance. On the contrary, it is a process of disillusionment, of peeling back layers, of confronting the unconscious, and emerging with something real. It is the slow burning away of everything false so that the flame of truth can shine. And this is why it takes time, because the unconscious does not operate on command. It does not yield its treasures to the impatient. It speaks in dreams, symbols, synchronicities, and inner conflict. It takes years, even decades, for many of us to learn how to listen. In our early lives, we often chase what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear to gain approval from society. It's the role we play: the good student, the obedient child, the ambitious professional, the charismatic partner. The persona is not inherently bad, it helps us function socially. But if we over-identify with it, we lose touch with the rest of who we are. Our shadow, our wounds, our deeper desires, even our creativity, all of these remain buried. At some point, usually through crisis or inner tension, the mask begins to crack. This is often experienced as a breakdown, a depression, or a sudden loss of direction. But Jung saw it differently. He believed this rupture was a sign of life, a call to individuation. In his words, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And becoming who you truly are is never fast. It cannot be manufactured. It emerges like a pearl, slowly forming under pressure, shaped by what we once thought was loss. Often the first half of life is about building the container, career, identity, structure, and the second half is about filling it with soul. This might be why what comes late holds the greatest value, because by the time it arrives, you're no longer receiving it from a place of craving, but from a place of readiness. You're no longer looking to it to complete you. You've already begun the work of becoming whole. Let's take an example: love. In our youth, love is often driven by projection. We fall in love with an image, a fantasy, someone who reflects our unacknowledged hopes and wounds. Jung called this the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine archetypes we project onto others. We don't see them as they are. We see them as we unconsciously need them to be. But over time, through heartbreak and disappointment, these projections dissolve. It hurts, but it's necessary. Only then can real intimacy begin, when we no longer need the other to carry our unlived life. This kind of love doesn't always happen early. It often comes late, after the ego has been softened, after the soul has learned to sit with itself. And because of that, it is richer, less performative, more enduring. The same is true of purpose. Many of us spend our 20s chasing achievement, hoping success will silence our inner doubts, and when it doesn't, we panic. But often, true purpose isn't found until we failed enough to question the script we were following. We begin to listen inward. We rediscover forgotten dreams. We feel called to serve something larger than ourselves. Jung believed that meaning, not happiness, was the ultimate goal of life. And meaning is not something you can hack or hustle. It reveals itself when you are ready to receive it. Sometimes, not until midlife. Sometimes, even later. One of the most beautiful aspects of Jung's philosophy is that it gives dignity to the long, uncertain journey. It honors the slow path. It validates the experience of the late bloomer, and it reminds us that the soul is not in a hurry. Consider the metaphor of nature. The oak tree takes decades to mature. The stars we see at night may have traveled millions of years to reach our eyes. There is nothing late about them. Their timing is perfect. Why should our unfolding be any different? But here's the paradox. The ego doesn't want to wait. It resists. It compares. It says, you should be further by now. And it uses others' timelines as weapons of self-judgment. That's when we begin to panic. That's when we feel lost. Jung's answer to this was not to ignore the ego, but to integrate it, to hold it in dialogue with the deeper self. He wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So much of our suffering comes not from external delay, but from inner confusion. We haven't yet realized that our suffering may be the doorway to our becoming. This is why the late things are so often the most valuable, because they arrive not when the ego demands, but when the soul is prepared. They are not driven by ambition, but by alignment. They are not hurried, but whole. Take a moment to reflect. What if the thing you feel is late in your life is not missing, but maturing? Not absent, but assembling behind the scenes of your consciousness? What if the delay is not punishment, but preparation? In truth, the longer it takes to arrive, the deeper its roots may grow. And the deeper the roots, the stronger the fruit. We are not here to bloom quickly. We are here to bloom truly. So when something in your life seems delayed, a dream, a relationship, a sense of purpose, remember Jung's great wisdom. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That acceptance begins when we stop rushing, when we stop comparing, when we begin to trust the pace of our own becoming. What comes late is not lesser. It may in fact be your soul's way of telling you, you were never behind, you were only becoming. 3. The alchemy of delay. How struggle refines the soul. Why does it sometimes take years, perhaps decades, for us to feel that we're truly alive, aligned, and whole? Why is it that the most meaningful relationships, the most authentic work, and the most profound peace only seem to come after long periods of wandering, suffering, and uncertainty? Carl Jung believed the answer lies in the alchemical nature of psychological transformation. He viewed the process of becoming oneself not as a smooth ascent, but as a symbolic journey through fire, shadow, and reconstitution. In alchemy, the base material, something raw, unrefined, and even considered worthless, is slowly transmuted into gold. But it cannot skip steps, and neither can we. Jung used alchemical stages to describe the individuation process. The first and most challenging is called the negredo, or blackening, a time of loss, confusion, even despair. This is where the old forms die. It often appears in life as a breakdown, a heartbreak, a career collapse, or a period of deep depression. What we once relied on no longer serves us. What we believe to be true begins to dissolve. In this darkness, the ego starts to lose its grip. But as painful as it is, this stage is not a mistake. It is essential. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. What delays us breaks us open. What postpones the dream forces us to reckon with what we are actually made of." We want clarity and control, but what we get instead is chaos and surrender. And this is not punishment. It is the psyche's way of clearing space. Consider the metaphor of a clay sculpture. Before the true figure can emerge, the unnecessary parts must be chipped away. The form only reveals itself through subtraction. Similarly, life sometimes delays our desires so that we can first be shaped to receive them. The next alchemical stage is albedo, or whitening. After the darkness comes light, but not in the form of answers, rather in the form of awareness. We begin to see ourselves more clearly. We realize that what we were chasing was never going to complete us. The ego begins to soften. We learn to listen inward, to accept contradictions, to hold paradox. We find grace not in perfection, but in presence. This is when the late blessings begin to form. They're not fully visible yet, but they are germinating. You may find yourself rediscovering parts of you that have been buried for years. Childhood dreams, longings, creative impulses, even forgotten intuitions. You're not who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. And in this liminal space, something sacred is taking root. Jung often spoke about the transcendent function, the moment when the tension between opposites gives rise to a new solution, something that could not be reached by logic alone. When we allow ourselves to sit in delay without rushing to fix or escape it, this function activates. The unconscious speaks, synchronicities appear, a new path reveals itself. This is why what comes late often feels so right when it finally arrives, because it was forged not in fantasy, but in fire. And then comes the third stage, citrinitas, or yellowing. This is the awakening of inner clarity. You no longer need validation from others. You are no longer scrambling to prove your worth. There is a subtle glow to your presence, a groundedness that others may not even understand, but they feel it. You are beginning to live from your center, not your surface. It is during this phase that delayed blessings come into view, not as rewards for suffering, but as natural outcomes of your alignment. The right people appear, the right work finds you. But more importantly, you have the eyes to see them and the heart to hold them. You realize if these gifts had arrived earlier, you would not have recognized their value. You might have sabotaged them or projected your old fears onto them. But now something in you is different. You've been tempered by waiting, refined by loss, strengthened by surrender. And finally, we reach rubedo, or reddening, the completion of the alchemical journey. Here, the opposites unite, spirit and matter, light and dark, ego and self. Jung saw this not as perfection, but integration. You no longer reject parts of yourself. You bring them all to the table, the wound and the wisdom, the shadow and the light. You become whole, and in this wholeness there is peace. You may still not have everything you once dreamed of, but what you do have feels real. You may still face challenges, but they no longer destabilize you the way they once did, because you are living from a deeper source. You are not waiting for life to start. You are rooted in the now. This is why those who bloom later often carry a special light. It's not flashy, it doesn't beg for attention, but it radiates a depth that can only come from having faced the dark. Carl Jung wrote, "The gold is not in the shadow, but through it." We often think the shadow delays us, but the shadow is the crucible. It is where the ego is dismantled, where our illusions are burned away, and where the deeper self begins to glow. So if you are in a season of delay, of waiting, of wondering, of not knowing, do not despair. Something is being forged in you, something that will not be given quickly because it cannot be. The world may see you as slow, behind, unsure, but the soul sees differently. It knows that transformation does not occur in haste. It respects the sacredness of the long way around. And when your moment arrives, it will not just be a new thing, a job, a person, an opportunity. It will be a new you, ready to meet it. Let this be your quiet comfort, that what comes late is not less. It may be more than you ever imagined, because it is shaped not by the timeline of the world, but by the depth of your becoming. You are not being punished by delay. You are being prepared by it. 4. The shadow knows the way, how delays reveal what we've denied. There's a strange, uncomfortable truth that many of us eventually encounter. We don't really know ourselves. Not fully. We know who we think we're supposed to be. We know what we've been praised for, what we've been punished for, what society deems successful or beautiful or worthy. But beneath that surface is another layer, the unspoken, the repressed, the forgotten. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, suppress, or refuse to look at. He wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort." And perhaps most importantly, he believed this. Until we confront the shadow, it rules our lives in secret. Now, what does this have to do with things arriving late? Everything. Because often, what causes delay in life is not the world blocking us, but the shadow within us doing so unconsciously. Not out of malice, but out of fear, pain, protection. A dream delayed may not be fate's cruelty. It may be the psyche's way of saying, "You're not ready because you're not whole yet." Let's say you deeply desire a healthy, loving relationship, but unconsciously your shadow still harbors wounds of abandonment or betrayal. It carries fears of vulnerability. It has not yet integrated the pain from childhood or previous heartbreaks or old family dynamics. So, despite your longing, you keep encountering disconnection. You attract emotionally unavailable partners. You self-sabotage or you isolate and give up. It feels like life is withholding love from you. But Jung would ask, what in you is blocking love? This question is not to blame, but to empower. The shadow is not evil. It is simply what we haven't faced. Often, it holds the very keys we need to unlock our future. A delayed career path might not be due to a lack of talent, but to a fear of visibility rooted in childhood criticism. A lack of creative output might not be laziness, but perfectionism, a coping mechanism born from shame. The inability to choose a direction in life might not be confusion, but a split in the psyche between desire and duty, passion and fear. Jung emphasized that until we integrate the shadow, we remain divided. One part of us pushes forward, another pulls back. We live in contradiction, and in this tension, progress stalls, not because we're incapable, but because we're incomplete. Here is the paradox. The shadow delays the very things we consciously desire. But once we face the shadow, it can deliver them. That is why Jung insisted that the path to wholeness runs straight through the places we'd rather avoid. The people who trigger us, the failures we try to forget, the fears we bury, the rage we deny. These are not obstacles, they are invitations. Invitations to retrieve the lost parts of ourselves, to reconcile what we once rejected, to expand our identity. And this takes time. Real integration cannot be rushed. It unfolds slowly through relationships, therapy, inner work, dreams, journaling, and deep reflection. This is why what comes late often holds such depth, because you've met more of yourself by the time it arrives. You no longer want success just to prove your worth. You no longer want love just to fill a hole. You want to give, to share, to be. And that shift is only possible once the shadow is not your enemy, but your guide. Let's explore a few examples of how the shadow plays out in the delays of life. Delayed voice. Perhaps you've always longed to express yourself through art, writing, public speaking, but you keep hesitating. You tell yourself you're not ready, but the real block might be shame. Somewhere long ago, you learned it wasn't safe to be heard. Someone mocked you, a parent dismissed you, the world silenced you, and your shadow carries that wound. Until you confront it, your voice stays hidden, not because of a lack of talent, but out of self-protection. When you finally do the work to reclaim your voice, the words will come, and when they do, they'll carry truth, not performance. Delayed calling. Many people spend years in the wrong career. They feel drained, stuck, uninspired. They dream of doing something more meaningful, but they don't know what that is. Often, the shadow contains the clues. Maybe you rejected your passion as impractical. Maybe you carry guilt about outshining your parents. Maybe your inner critic insists that your dreams are foolish. These unseen forces delay your calling, not because it's not available, but because it's being filtered through fear. Once you meet that fear, the way becomes clearer. Delayed love. You long for a soulmate, but the shadow is still holding on to heartbreak, betrayal, or abandonment. Perhaps you never witnessed a healthy relationship growing up. Perhaps you associate love with danger. Until you bring awareness to these patterns, love will feel like a mirage, always close, never quite landing. But when you begin to love the parts of yourself you once deemed unlovable, the kind of relationship you attract transforms. You're no longer looking to be rescued, you're looking to connect. Jung taught that the shadow is not to be destroyed but befriended, and when we do, life begins to move. What was delayed begins to flow. Not all at once, but steadily, sustainably, meaningfully. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This quote strikes at the heart of our theme. So often, we want the light to come early. We want the love, the success, the clarity, without having faced the darkness that blocks them. But life and psyche are not wired that way. The light that comes after the dark, that's the light that stays. And so, if you are in a season where you feel stuck or stalled, ask not only, what do I want, but also, what in me is afraid of receiving it? What in me has not yet been heard, healed, or honored? This shift in question changes everything, because now you are not just waiting, you are working, not in the outer world, but in the soul. And that inner work magnetizes the outer shifts. In this way, delay is not stagnation, it is gestation. You are not behind, you are beneath. And beneath is where the gold lives. The truth is, many people will never face their shadows. They will stay on the surface, chasing quick solutions and shallow affirmations. And perhaps they will seem further ahead, at least for a time. But depth cannot be faked, and peace cannot be bought. Those who take the slow path, through pain, through confusion, through honest inner work, may not arrive quickly, but they arrive fully. And that is the kind of arrival that changes everything. So let your delay be sacred. Let it be a signal, not of failure, but of your willingness to become whole. And when you emerge, when the love lands, the purpose crystallizes, the voice rises, know this: it came late because it waited for the real you. Not the mask, not the performance, but the soul. And the soul always arrives in its own perfect time. 5. Synchronicity in the right time, when the universe begins to move with you. There comes a point on the inner journey when the sense of delay begins to shift, not because everything has suddenly arrived, but because your relationship to time itself changes. The anxiety of when begins to soften. The urgency of how long loses its grip. And in that quiet, something else begins to stir. A sense that life is not random, that the universe is not ignoring you. That, perhaps, there's a deeper intelligence guiding your path, one that speaks in symbols, signs, and silent nudges. Carl Jung called this synchronicity. Synchronicity, as Jung defined it, is the meaningful coincidence. Two events that are not causally linked, but are connected through meaning. It's when an inner state and an outer event align in a way that feels almost orchestrated. You think of someone you haven't seen in years, and they call. You're wrestling with a decision, and a song lyric or a stranger's words give you clarity. You stumble upon a book that answers the very question you didn't even know how to ask. Jung's concept of synchronicity isn't mere superstition. He believed it was evidence of the causal connecting principle, a bridge between the psyche and the cosmos. In other words, the more attuned you are to your inner life, the more life itself begins to mirror your transformation. And this is why the things that come late often arrive with synchronicity, not because they were late in cosmic time, but because they could only arrive when you were internally aligned. The universe responds to coherence. When the conscious and unconscious begin to move together, so does the world around you. Let's unpack this. In the first half of life, many people strive purely from the ego. The goals are externally defined: success, image, acquisition. And while effort does yield results, those results often feel hollow. Even when you get what you want, something is missing. That missing piece, Jung would say, is soul. But once the process of individuation begins, once you start listening inward, integrating the shadow, honoring your true nature, something remarkable happens. You stop chasing and things begin finding you. Not all at once, not like magic, but in ways that feel unmistakably aligned. It's as if by becoming more yourself, you become more in tune with life itself. Jung told the story of a woman he was treating who was deeply rational and closed off from the unconscious. She described a dream in which someone gave her a golden scarab, a symbol of transformation and rebirth. As she recounted the dream in session, a real scarab beetle, a very rare species in that part of the world, began tapping against the window. Jung caught it and presented it to her, saying, "Here is your scarab." That moment cracked something open in her. Her intellect could not explain it, but her soul recognized it. This is the power of synchronicity. It does not prove, it reveals. It bypasses logic and speaks to something deeper. And this too is why delays are not empty. During the long stretches of not yet, the soul is preparing. The unconscious is shifting. And when alignment is reached, not when the ego says so, but when the self knows so, life responds. The meeting happens. The door opens. The message arrives. You may wonder, how do I know if I'm experiencing synchronicity or just coincidence? The answer lies in meaning. Synchronicity feels significant. It lands in the body. It moves the heart. It carries a charge that coincidence does not. It feels like something larger is participating with you. And the more inner work you've done, the more you begin to recognize these moments, not as tricks of the mind, but as confirmations of the path. Life is no longer a maze, it's a mirror. And the clearer your inner world, the more accurate that reflection becomes. This is why people who have gone through years of delay often describe a kind of click when the right thing finally arrives. It could be a new partner, a new city, a calling, a piece of clarity. And what they say is almost always the same. I just knew. I felt it in my bones. It was as if it had been waiting for me all along. That's synchronicity. And it's not something you can force. It's not something you can hack. It's not something you can manifest through wishful thinking. It's something you invite by becoming real, by becoming whole. So let's reframe the idea of delay once again, not as denial, but as orchestration. You are not just waiting. You are tuning, aligning, maturing. Jung saw the self, the center of the total psyche, as having a kind of gravitational pull. When we move toward wholeness, the self draws experiences, people, and insights toward us. Not instantly, but inevitably. And those experiences, Jung said, are not just random happenings. They are symbols, symbols that guide us deeper into our own becoming. You dream of a house with many rooms. Perhaps you are ready to explore more of your inner life. You keep seeing the same animal, a representation of instincts or archetypes stirring within you. You meet someone who echoes a familiar pattern, the anima or animus, reminding you of unfinished business. When we're disconnected from ourselves, we miss these cues. Life feels flat, random, chaotic. But when we've done the inner work, even silence feels significant. Even delays feel full. Let's be clear, synchronicity is not always comfortable. Sometimes it comes through loss. Sometimes it requires a leap of faith. But it always asks this of you: are you paying attention? Because when the right thing comes, be it a purpose, a relationship, or a peace you've never known, you'll know it not by how fast it comes, but by how true it feels. It won't require performance. It won't trigger panic. It will feel like a homecoming, not to a place, but to yourself. So in this season of not yet, notice the signs. Pay attention to your dreams. Be curious about the coincidences. Journal the things that repeat. Watch what patterns reappear. Not to analyze obsessively, but to sense what your unconscious might be whispering. Because it's not just that things come late. It's that when they come at the right moment, in the right way, they carry the weight of the whole journey behind them. They arrive not just with timing, but with meaning, not just with logic, but with soul. And that's when you'll realize you were never being delayed. You were being delivered to yourself, to your path, to your alignment. Synchronicity is not magic, it's resonance. And the greatest things in life don't just arrive when you want them to. They arrive when you're finally ready to receive them. 6. The wisdom of late bloomers. Why the second act is often the truest world. Have you ever noticed that some of the most grounded, inspiring, and impactful people you meet aren't necessarily those who soared early in life, but those who struggled, wandered, failed, and then bloomed? There's a certain radiance that belongs only to late bloomers. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but it is anchored. You can feel the depth behind their presence. You can sense that their wisdom was not downloaded from a book. It was lived painfully and personally. Carl Jung understood this archetype deeply. He devoted much of his later work to what he called the second half of life, a stage where one is no longer dominated by ego pursuits, but begins the inward journey toward wholeness, authenticity, and spiritual maturity. In Jung's view, the first half of life is often consumed with adaptation, building a persona, forming relationships, choosing a profession, finding a place in the world. These are important tasks, but they often require compromises, sacrifices of our deeper truth for the sake of fitting in. Then something happens, a crisis, a divorce, a burnout, a death, or maybe just a slow dawning realization. This isn't who I really am. This marks the beginning of what Jung called the individuation process, the journey of peeling back the layers of social expectation and rediscovering the self. And it's here in this second act of life that so many people find their true voice, their real purpose, their deepest calling. It's also here that many things they wished had come earlier, love, creativity, clarity, finally begin to arrive. Not because they worked harder, but because they became ready, ready to see, ready to receive, ready to risk living from the soul, not from the mask. Think of some of the most beloved figures in history who bloomed late. Viktor Frankl, after surviving the Holocaust, didn't write Man's Search for Meaning until his mid-40s. His most profound insights forged not in ease, but in suffering. Toni Morrison published her first novel at 39 and won the Nobel Prize decades later, her voice deepened by years of motherhood and editing. Stan Lee, creator of Spider-Man, was nearly 40 before his breakthrough. Julia Child didn't become a cooking icon until her 50s. Even Carl Jung himself, his major break with Freud and emergence of his core theories happened in his 40s, after a painful internal breakdown that he called his confrontation with the unconscious. What these lives show us is something profoundly hopeful, that our deepest value, our most resonant contributions, our most aligned loves and paths may come later, but they come with substance. And here's why this matters so much today. We live in a culture that idolizes early success. 20 under 20, millionaire by 30, peak by midlife. If you haven't found your purpose by a certain age, society subtly suggests you're falling behind. But what if the soul doesn't keep that calendar? What if your first 40 years were not a delay, but a foundation? Jung believed that the self does not emerge under pressure. It emerges through readiness. And readiness often comes only after disillusionment, when the ego no longer dominates and the deeper questions begin to arise. What makes life meaningful? What am I here to offer? What parts of me have I ignored or sacrificed? What do I love? Not for recognition, but for its own sake. These are the questions that don't usually arise in the rush of early ambition. They arrive when the surface cracks, when space opens, when life slows us down enough to listen. And when we begin to listen, we often discover unlived parts of ourselves waiting quietly in the wings. The artist who became an accountant to please their parents. The healer who spent years hiding their intuition behind a corporate mask. The lover who buried their vulnerability under layers of independence. The philosopher who spent decades solving others' problems but never explored their own. All of these parts don't disappear. They wait, patiently, in the unconscious. And if we're willing to turn inward, they begin to stir. This is the gift of the second half of life. It is not a decline, it is a return. Not to the past, but to the authentic self that was always waiting underneath. And so, the things that come in this later chapter, whether it's falling in love after 50, starting a new passion in your 60s, or discovering peace in your 70s carry a gravity that younger achievements often lack. They are not built for approval, they are born of truth. There's also an important psychological shift that occurs in late bloomers. They no longer confuse timing with value. They know that just because something comes late doesn't mean it's second rate. In fact, it often means it's right on time. Jung wrote, "The afternoon of life must have a significance of its own and cannot be merely a pitiful appendage to life's morning." He saw this later stage as more important, not less. Because now, the person is not driven by roles, but by essence. And what they offer to the world is not novelty, but depth. They've faced the shadow, they've sat in silence, they've endured disappointment, they've learned to let go. And because of that, what they give, whether it's wisdom, love, art, or presence, feels whole. It carries resonance. It nourishes others because it is no longer performative. It is real. This is why we are drawn to late bloomers. Not because they are glamorous, but because they are grounded. So if you're listening to this and feel behind, pause, breathe, consider this. Maybe you're not late. Maybe you're just right on time for your deeper life to begin. Maybe your soul has been growing in the unseen, putting down roots in darkness, preparing for a harvest that others can't yet see. And when it comes, it won't just be success. It will be you, fully embodied. And that is something time cannot fake or fabricate. So let yourself bloom when you're ready. Let yourself be lit not by pressure, but by purpose. And when the world tries to measure you by speed or age, remember this: the most beautiful trees blossom last. The richest wines take the longest to mature. And the deepest souls are those who took their time becoming. You are not missing your moment. You are becoming someone who will recognize it when it comes. 7. Letting go of control. How surrender opens the door to arrival. One of the hardest lessons in life, perhaps the hardest, is learning how to let go. Letting go of timelines. Letting go of who we thought we were supposed to be. Letting go of how we thought things would turn out. Letting go of control. Control is the mind's attempt to feel safe. We all do it. We make plans, set goals, visualize outcomes, cling to structure, because we believe that if we can just get it right, everything will fall into place. But as Carl Jung reminds us, the unconscious has its own will. The self moves in mysterious ways, and often, the more tightly we grip, the more life resists our demands. Jung wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." This is one of the paradoxes of spiritual and psychological growth. It often requires that we loosen our grasp before we're ready, that we soften before we feel safe, that we trust before we understand. When we fixate on a specific outcome, be it a relationship, a career path, a healing timeline, we cut ourselves off from the deeper intelligence of the psyche. We try to force ripeness before the fruit is ready. And in doing so, we create friction, anxiety, and disappointment. But when we begin to surrender, not in defeat, but in devotion, something shifts. The soul begins to breathe again. Jung believed that the path to individuation requires a death of the old self. Not a physical death, but the death of illusions, roles, and false identities. And what stands in the way of that death is often control. We want transformation, but on our terms. We want growth, but without discomfort. We want truth, but only if it doesn't contradict our plans. And so the soul waits, life delays, not as punishment, but because the gate cannot open until we're willing to set down the armor. The path ahead cannot reveal itself until we release the need to see 10 steps ahead. This is why surrender is not passive. It is active trust. It's a courageous choice to say, even if I don't know when this will come, even if I don't know what it will look like, I trust that my becoming is still unfolding. I trust that my path is sacred, even when it's silent. Surrender doesn't mean we stop taking action. It means we stop acting from desperation. We move, but from presence, not panic. And it is often at this moment, when we stop grasping for what we want, that what we truly need begins to emerge. You may have experienced this already. That strange and beautiful moment when you give up trying to force love and real connection arrives. When you let go of chasing a title and true purpose begins to surface. When you stop trying to make life happen and instead allow it to unfold. This is not coincidence. This is the soul responding to surrender, because control is a language the ego speaks. But surrender, that's the native tongue of the self. Let's explore why surrender so often precedes arrival. One, surrender breaks the illusion of separation. When we are in control mode, we operate from a false belief that we are alone, that it's all up to us, that we must force every outcome. This isolates us from the flow of life. But surrender reconnects us. It reminds us that we are part of a larger whole, that our journey is not solitary, but synchronized with a deeper rhythm. 2. Surrender opens space for the unconscious to move. Jung believed that healing, creativity, and meaning emerge from the unconscious. But the conscious mind often blocks this process with rigidity. When we surrender, we allow the unconscious to rise. We create room for intuition, dreams, and synchronicities to guide us. 3. Surrender humbles the ego and invites the self. The ego seeks control because it is afraid. It wants to guarantee success, avoid pain, and predict the future. But the self knows that real life cannot be predicted. It must be lived. Surrender is the ego's way of saying, I don't know. And in that humility, the self steps forward. Consider the story of someone who spent years trying to build a business that never quite worked. They forced it, controlled every detail, obsessively planned, and yet it drained them. It wasn't until they paused, reflected, and surrendered their attachment to that identity that a new idea emerged, one that felt joyful, intuitive, and real. And that idea succeeded. Or think of someone who chased relationships, desperate not to be alone. They tried to mold themselves into what others wanted. But it wasn't until they surrendered to solitude, truly learned to love their own company, that they met someone who loved them not for the performance, but for their essence. These stories are not rare. They are archetypal. They reflect a truth woven into the very fabric of the soul. What is forced is fragile. What is allowed is real. And what is real, what is meant, may come late, but it stays. Jung once said, "The greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally unsolvable. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." Outgrowing a problem requires surrender, letting it work on us rather than trying to control it, giving it space to teach us, shape us, mature us. In that sense, surrender is not giving up, it's growing up. And perhaps that's the true purpose of the delay, not to frustrate us, but to prepare us for a different kind of power. A power not rooted in control, but in alignment. Not in force, but in flow. Not in certainty, but in trust. This kind of surrender is not always dramatic. It doesn't require a breakdown or a pilgrimage to a distant land. Sometimes it's as simple and as radical as saying each morning, I release my need to control how and when. I commit only to being present. I trust that what is meant for me will come, not by force, but by fidelity to my becoming. When we live this way, something opens. Life begins to feel less like a chase and more like a dance. We stop measuring our worth by speed. We stop interpreting delay as rejection. And we begin to see, truly see, that everything that is meant is already on its way. Maybe not fast, but true and lasting. So if you find yourself in a season of stillness, if the things you long for seem delayed, if you feel like you've done all you can and still the door hasn't opened, ask not, what more can I do? But what more can I let go of? Because when the soul is ready, when you've laid down the armor and opened your heart, what is truly yours will not need to be chased. It will come, quietly, unmistakably, and right on time. 8. The gift of arrival. When the soul finally recognizes itself, there comes a quiet day, sometimes suddenly, sometimes after years, when you look around and realize you're no longer waiting. The panic is gone. The grasping has softened. You're not searching for signs or forcing outcomes. Instead, you're simply here, present, whole, grounded. It's subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, but something has shifted. Something within you has finally arrived, and it didn't come in the way you once imagined. It didn't look like a grand success or a dramatic breakthrough. It came as something deeper, recognition. You see yourself, not who you're trying to be, not who you wish you were, but who you truly are. And in that moment, everything that once felt late begins to make sense. Carl Jung believed that the goal of life was not perfection, but wholeness. And wholeness is not a finish line. It is a moment-to-moment presence, a reunion of all your parts, a homecoming of the soul. He wrote, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And what you've become through the delays, the losses, the wanderings, is someone who can finally hold the life that is yours. In this final stage of the journey, things begin to come together. not because you controlled them into place, but because you've become a match for them. The love you meet sees you because you see yourself. The work you do flows because it's not driven by performance. The peace you feel stays because it's rooted in alignment, not circumstance. You realize that what once felt like a punishment of delay was actually a grace of preparation. You weren't being denied. You were being developed. You weren't being forgotten. You were being forged. And now that you've arrived internally, the external begins to reflect that truth. But here's the paradox of arrival. It doesn't look the way the younger self imagined. It's not a mountaintop moment with applause and certainty. It's not a prize or a spotlight or a finish line. It's not about having it all. It's about being at peace with what is. It's about walking into a room and no longer needing to prove anything. It's about waking up and knowing you don't need to chase the next big thing to feel whole. It's about sitting in silence and feeling full, not empty. Because now, you are no longer run by the hunger of the ego. You are led by the quiet wisdom of the self. You've integrated the shadow. You've released the timeline. You've survived the alchemy. And now, you stand not as a product of perfection, but as a person of presence. This is the deep gift of what comes late. It comes after you've done the work. It comes after you've stopped begging life to give you something. It comes when you realize you've already become someone, and what a someone you've become. You are no longer the desperate seeker. You are the calm receiver. You are no longer clinging to answers. You are living the questions with grace. You are no longer looking for a map. You've become your own compass. Jung often wrote about the self as the organizing principle of the psyche, not the ego, not the personality, but the center. And arrival, in his view, was not about finally getting what you wanted. It was about remembering who you are and aligning your outer life with that deep inner truth. And so the late arrival becomes the most sacred one, because it's not just about external milestones. It's about resonance. It's about the feeling that your life finally fits, that your values are embodied, that your love is honest, that your presence is healing, not only to others, but to yourself. You are no longer split. You are no longer in conflict with yourself. You've made peace with your past, compassion with your imperfections, and friendship with the unknown. You've arrived. And here's the most extraordinary thing. Once you arrive, you no longer cling to what's coming next. You're not afraid of change or delay or uncertainty. Because you've walked through the darkness, you've survived the not knowing, you've learned how to live without the map, and that makes you someone unshakable, someone who can love deeply without losing themselves, someone who can pursue meaning without chasing applause, someone who can live in time while listening to eternity. This is the fruit of the long journey, the treasure that cannot be rushed, the wisdom that only comes through waiting, watching, and walking forward even when the path wasn't clear. So if you're still in the middle of it, if you're still wandering, if your timing still feels off, let this final message land gently. You are not behind. You are blooming. You are not broken. You are unfolding. You are not lost. You are becoming whole. And when what you've longed for finally comes, when the doors open, when the love arrives, when the purpose crystallizes, when the peace settles into your bones, you will not say, "I wish it had come sooner." You will say, with tears of knowing in your eyes, "Now I understand why it took so long. Now I see I had to become the person who could receive this, and that took time, but it was worth every moment." Because what comes late often has the greatest value, not in quantity, not in status, but in truth. It came late because it came with you. And so, dear traveler of the inner world, if you're still waiting for your time, your calling, your peace, remember this: the soul does not move according to the clock. It moves according to depth, readiness, and truth. What comes late is not lesser. It is often the most refined, the most aligned, the most sacred. In the unfolding of your life, trust that everything is arriving exactly when you are ready. You are not here to rush. You are here to become. If this message stirred something within you, or brought you a moment of clarity or calm, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Galactic Wisdom. Your presence helps us grow a community of conscious seekers who believe, like you, that the inner journey is the real one. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What in your life came late, but ended up being more meaningful than you ever expected? Until next time, may you trust the timing of your soul, honor your own unfolding, and remember, you are not behind, you are becoming. This is Galactic Wisdom. Thank you for listening, thank you for being, and thank you for blooming in your own time.